Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Nice to be back home for a couple of weeks and to get an opportunity to share with you about what we're doing and a little bit of the background of Project Sunrise. It's a bit over 2 years since we were here. I don't know if you saw that little blonde bundle of energy that I was trying to control in the children's talk. Aaron was a little baby when we were here, I think 3 months, so he's now a lively 2.5-year-old, and his big brother leading the children's talk there. Ezra is now 5.5, so the time is flying by quite quickly. On Thursday at the prayer meeting, I spoke a little bit about extreme poverty and inequality, just to set the scene about Project Sunrise, and I wanted to pick up that a little bit this morning. I think we might have some visuals. So on the screen here you see it's a caption from the World Poverty Clock website, and as we speak here, this website is tracking people exiting and entering extreme poverty around the world. And I think why I'm drawing attention to this is a lot of people have had experience of South Africa, like Bobby said, many have been on holiday, and you see a very different South Africa than the one that we live and work in, and I think the numbers in this extreme poverty really draw attention to that. So this website is tracking Sustainable Development Goal number 1, the UN goal, to get rid of extreme poverty by 2030. And like a lot of the Sustainable Development Goals, the world is not on track to achieve them. There's about 590 million people around the world in extreme poverty, and in South Africa about 13 million. But what's very alarming, I think, is that there's 13 countries. You see those red countries there. It's not red because they've necessarily got the highest number. It's red because extreme poverty is increasing in those countries, not decreasing. And there's, by 2030, if it continues as it is, there's only going to be 13 countries that have people living in extreme poverty, South Africa being one of those, because we're not winning the battle. So South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. I think if we flip forward, we'll see some of the imagery that shows that. If technology's going to behave, we had some problems there. That's some of the numbers I spoke about, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see it's the most unequal country in the world, and it surpassed Brazil several years ago. And you'll see the picture there of the rich people and the space they have for their golf and recreation, and the poor people and the space they have to live in tiny shacks. And this is mirrored around most of South Africa, but often hidden away. So when you go there on tourist trips, you don't necessarily see the other side. You get to see the nice part of things. Our work is all about trying to reverse that statistic, trying to bring some kind of justice, especially in rural communities, not so much in these urban communities, in tribal communities that have been oppressed for decades. And Project Sunrise is particularly looking to assist that by improving the lives of young children. If we just put forward them again. So I think you've seen this picture before, and actually just reminded now that with Mission Focus Group on Wednesday, some of the team preparation comments were about learning some words. I only realise now the key person who runs Project Sunrise Crash is in the green t-shirt there, and her name is Mrs. Telly. So that's a good start for you. I think we can pronounce that. Otherwise we're going to have problems straight away. Telly. So Ezra will definitely do lessons on this. You know, he makes me look stupid on these things. But Mrs. Telly is the founder of Sunrise Crash in the green there, in a village called Washula. And she first heard about Network Action Group, where we work, through a program that we were running called Future Leaders. So a young lady from a neighbouring village was a future leader for NAG, and through her duties she identified this creche. Now typically, you know, this is just a mud building, there's no signage anywhere. I think Alex took a picture of a very primitive sign, things are starting to move forward a little bit. But generally, it's very hard to find where children are being kept for, looked after. Nobody has a database. Government has no clue where these things are to provide service to try and improve them. And that's a lot of our work that we do initially, is just to find these places and start connecting people together. And so this young lady found Sunrise Creche and profiled them. This is about 6 years ago, started visiting weekly. Subsequently, we've done quite a bit of work in terms of sorting out administration, helping with very basic details. So Mrs. Kelly was born during apartheid in South Africa, and her family's land was seized by British colonial powers prior to apartheid to be used as by colonial settlers for agriculture. If we just flip to the next picture. So this is typically on the left, the kind of land that the Tushula community previously occupied, and they farmed very sustainably on that land. So the Zulus were very good farmers and traders, and when the British were settling in KwaZulu-Natal, they used to buy most of the British had money, but they were not long there. They had no settlement, they had no food. They used to buy most of their food from the Zulus because they were better than the Afrikaners, the white Afrikaners, at farming and trading. But then behind the doors, the Afrikaners and the British had a meeting and said, no, you cannot trade with the natives. We're poor here, we need you to buy stuff from us. So all of this land was seized in the early 1900s, and all of these communities were isolated into very remote parts. Alex will tell you stories about the community of Tushula. It's very hilly, remote valley, far up the area. So they really have been squashed into these very marginal land, unsuitable for agriculture, very far from market routes and transport. So when I was preparing what I was going to talk about today, I was reflecting on some verses that we'd been reading a few years ago that really struck me at that point in terms of being very prophetic about the situation in South Africa with inequality. I think we can flip to the next one. This is in Isaiah. Woe to you who add house to house and join field to field, till no space is left, and you live alone on the land. So this verse is really talking about God's dislike for inequality and greed. The hundreds of ladies that we work with on a daily basis, mostly preschool teachers, who are themselves often living in extreme poverty, they don't wallow in self-pity at all. That's what impresses me. If I was coming from this background of being very marginalised, of seeing this land that used to be our forefathers every day, of being stuck in this very isolated, barren piece of land where we can grow bits and pieces but really struggle and live in extreme poverty, I would be, I think, angry. And the youth maybe are starting to get a bit angry in South Africa, but these ladies, this generation of ladies in 40s and 50s and 60s that we work with, over 1,000 of them in southern KwaZulu-Natal, they don't worry about the bitterness. The majority of them are Christians, and their faith encourages them to make a brighter future for the children in their communities. So despite all of the unfairness of their situation and the lack of resources that they have, they put their full energy and commitment into making a difference in their communities, and they do that usually by starting grassroots organisations like Sunrise Creche. So that's what we aim to do as NAG. We aim to find those pioneers and support them and encourage them on their journeys to build stronger grassroots organisations. And the needs are great. There's many organisations needing help, and it means that organisations wait for years often to get help. You've heard that Sunrise Creche, we've known about them for 6 years, and in the 7th year in 2020, I think things are going to transform dramatically for them. There's another 450 that we work with, like Sunrise Creche, and many of them haven't received that support, and they wait patiently. They continue, they're sustainable, they're not expecting something, they're continuing to improve the lives of young children in their communities. So God is a God of justice, and he doesn't like this kind of inequality, and we see this throughout the Bible with many examples. Of course, we know about the Jubilee system of debt cancellation. To be a people of God like we are means to practice justice. A just system is required for all people, despite what their ethnic origin or background is. So this verse from Exodus 22, don't abuse or take advantage of strangers. You remember were once strangers in Egypt. So this theme of justice starts very early in the Bible, and we see it then going through into the prophets. In Jeremiah, it says, this is God's message. Attend to matters of justice. Set things right between people. Rescue victims from their exploiters. Don't take advantage of the homeless or the orphans or the widows. We also see it in the Gospels. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. And also in the early church, in Acts chapter 2, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone, because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. So this heart of God's about justice and equality is throughout the Bible, and Paul's words to the Galatians also talks about this issue of equality. There's no longer Jew or Greek. There's no longer slave or free. There's no longer male and female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. So I think for us, for Maria and I, this is the background of what inspires us to do what we do. It's our perspective on how we see a global church, that God doesn't see nations and countries. He sees his people wherever they are, and if he's looking down and seeing his people, he is grieved by inequalities, by injustices, and I think he calls us as his church to do something about those injustices. And you know, this is maybe why God is calling Liggett to do Project Sunrise. And for the team that are coming out, I know that we get caught up in a lot of practical details and what our tasks are going to be, but I would encourage you also to be very encouraged and reflective on what Project Sunrise is going to mean for the community. For them, it's a systemic shift towards justice and equality, and it's going to be a dramatic symbol for them to see a church in Northern Ireland partnering with this forgotten community in rural South Africa. So I would ask that you reflect on that as a church. You know, I think everyone's busy with fundraising activities and busy preparing mentally about going away on the team, and I think that's brilliant. You know, it's nice to see the busyness. I was speechless on Friday night, thinking that, you know, the amount of volunteers and work that's gone into the event on Friday night, and all of these then performers who have no real link to Liggett have been mobilised to give their skills for free for essentially the community of Kushula. And I think you should reflect on that and what it's going to mean for the community, because it will be huge for them, and it's this kind of systemic shift that can really change things. I believe that's God's heart and his desire for his people to be involved in these kind of projects that make a big change through the global church. It's providing hope to Mrs. Telly and her team And that kind of hope was described in the prophets, where Isaiah is describing God's future redeemed kingdom. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. For as the days of a tree, so will be the days of my people. My chosen ones will long enjoy the work of their hands. They will not labor in vain, nor will they bear children doomed to misfortune. For they will be people blessed by the Lord, they and their descendants with them. I think that prophetic books of the Bible are quite inspiring at times, because you read something that you really realize, God knows exactly what is happening in 2019 and where you are and where your situation is. When I read those words, it really describes, that the community that you see there. No longer will they build houses and others live in them. The rural people in South Africa are exploited for their labour, and they've a lot of skills, and you'll find these guys that are brilliant builders. They've been building for 30 years, and you go and see the house that they live in, and the houses that they build in the town, So the other thing that stood out for me in that verse was about all of the ladies that we work with, and it says, no longer will they bear children doomed to misfortune. Youth unemployment in the area now in South Africa as a whole is about 55%. And I think if you talk to Mrs. Telly, the one thing that would be on her heart and her friends and neighbours would be seeing their children striving hard at school, getting a degree, and then sitting at home with nothing to do because there's no work opportunities. So this future redeemed kingdom that God is describing through Isaiah, where there will no longer bear children doomed to misfortune, for they will be a people blessed by the Lord, they and their descendants with them. That is the hope that Mrs. Telly understands. And I think she understands it better than most of us. And I think as we're coming to partner with her and with Dwashula, we should start to dwell on that also and see how can we understand that better. We might not be in a place of deep injustice and deep poverty, but how can we try and learn that from these people that we're partnering with who are in that situation. So for each of us personally involved in the project, in Project Sunrise and similar initiatives, it's central to our salvation with Jesus, I believe, and this is communicated through the Gospel of Matthew. Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, who are members of my family, you did it to me. So I hope that gives you a bit of inspiration and food for thought to reflect over the festive period. Project Sunrise can be, it's a brilliant project, and we're very excited to have the church partnering. Somewhat intimidated with the list of participants down on the team. You hear about who's coming, and you've got the minister, the clerk of session, you've got the treasurer. So a bit intimidating, I suppose. We've got a chief engineer here coming out to check our buildings. It's a full intervention team. But very exciting for us. I think we're looking forward very much to having the team. And I think, there's a lot that we can get out of Project Sunrise. We're of course primarily benefiting the children of Dwashula and hopefully transforming that community through that process. But there's a lot that we can reflect on. There's a lot of wider learning and a lot of deeper partnership we can do if we have time to reflect and to see how things are in the community, to understand how Mrs. Teddy and her team experience life. And I think we'll be very busy with practical work. I'm certainly not giving them an easy schedule, but I do hope to work in times of deeper learning and reflection, and times for the team to connect with people there. We've got a team coming with a very wide skill set, and we look forward to utilising that as best as possible and hoping that everyone benefits from it. People of Tashula will benefit from it, no doubt, but I believe that the people of Liggett and all of us can benefit a lot in terms of understanding God's church, God's global church, and His vision for equality in that. So I think we're just going to have a short prayer now and then finish with an item of praise. Let's bow our heads.